See also Kursk K-141 Kursk, Atomnaya Podvodnaya Lodka Kursk, meaning nuclear-powered submarine. Kursk was an Kursk, the second-class nuclear-powered cruise missile submarine of the Russian Navy, which was lost with all hands when it sank in the Barents Sea on 12 August 2000. It was a Project 949A submarine. It was named after the Russian city of Kursk, around which the largest tank battle in history, the Battle of Kursk, took place in 1943. One of the first vessels completed after the end of the Soviet Union, it was commissioned into the Russian Navy's Northern Fleet. Construction work on building Kursk began in 1990 at Severodvinsk, near Archangels. Launched in 1994, it was commissioned in December of that year. It was the penultimate Kursk, the second-class submarine designed and approved in the Soviet era. Capabilities. The Antey design represented the highest achievement of Soviet nuclear submarine technology. They were the largest attack submarines ever built. It was built to defeat an entire United States aircraft carrier group. A single Type 65 torpedo carried a 450 kg warhead powerful enough to sink an aircraft carrier. Both missiles and torpedoes could be equipped with nuclear warheads. She was 30 feet longer than any other Kursk, the first-class submarine. The senior officers had individual staterooms and the entire crew had access to a gymnasium. The outer hull, made of high-nickel, high-chrome content stainless steel 8.5 mm thick, had exceptionally good resistance to corrosion and a weak magnetic signature which helped prevent detection by U.S. magnetic anomaly detector systems. There was a 200 cm gap to the 50.8 mm thick steel pressure hull. She was designed to remain submerged for up to 120 days. The sail superstructure was reinforced to allow it to break through the Arctic ice. The submarine was armed with 24 SSN-19 P-700 Granite cruise missiles, and 8 torpedo tubes in the bow, 4 533 mm and 4 650 mm. The Granite missiles, with a range of 550 km, were capable of supersonic flight at altitudes over 20 km. They were designed to swarm enemy vessels and intelligently choose individual targets which terminated with a dive onto the target. The torpedo tubes could be used to launch either torpedoes or anti-ship missiles with a range of 50 km. Her weapons included 18 SSN-16 Stallion anti-ship missiles designed to defeat the best Western naval air defenses. Kursk was part of Russia's Northern Fleet, which had suffered funding cutbacks throughout the 1990s. Many of its submarines were anchored and rusting in Zapadnaya Lodka naval base, 100 kilometers from Murmansk. Little work to maintain all but the most essential frontline equipment, including search and rescue equipment, had occurred. Northern Fleet sailors had gone unpaid in the mid-1990s. Deployments. During her 5 years of service, Kursk completed only one mission, a 6-month deployment to the Mediterranean during the summer of 1999 to monitor the United States 6th Fleet responding to the Kosovo crisis. This was due to a lack of funds for fuel. As a result, many of her crew had spent little time at sea and were inexperienced. Naval exercise and disaster. Kursk joined the Summer X exercise, the first large-scale naval exercise planned by the Russian Navy in more than a decade, on the 10th of August 2000. It included 30 ships including the fleet's flagship Pyotr Veliki, 4 attack submarines, and a flotilla of smaller ships. A crew had recently won a citation for its excellent performance and been recognized as the best submarine crew in the Northern Fleet. While it was an exercise, Kursk loaded a full complement of combat weapons. It was one of the few ships authorized to carry a combat load at all times. Explosion. On the first day of the exercise, Kursk successfully launched a granite missile armed with a dummy warhead. 2 days later, on the morning of the 12th of August, Kursk prepared to fire dummy torpedoes at the Kirov-class battle cruiser Peter the Great. These practice torpedoes had no explosive warheads and were manufactured and tested at a much lower quality standard. On the 12th of August 2000, at 11:28 local time, there was an explosion while preparing to fire. The Russian Navy's final report on the disaster concluded the explosion was due to the failure of one of Kursk's hydrogen peroxide fuel type 65 torpedoes. A subsequent investigation concluded that HTP, a form of highly concentrated hydrogen peroxide used as propellant for the torpedo, seeped through a faulty weld in the torpedo casing. When HTP comes in contact with a catalyst, it rapidly expands by a factor of 5,000, generating vast quantities of steam and oxygen. The pressure produced by the expanding HTP ruptured the kerosene fuel tank in the torpedo and set off an explosion equal to 100 to 250 kilograms of TNT. The submarine sank in relatively shallow water, bottoming at 108 meters, about 135 kilometers off Severomorsk, at 69.667 degrees north, 37.583 degrees east, 69.667, 37.583. A second explosion 135 seconds after the initial event was equivalent to 3 to 7 tons of TNT. The explosions blew a large hole in the hull and collapsed the first 3 compartments of the sub, killing or incapacitating all but 23 of the 118 personnel on board. Rescue attempts. Though the British and Norwegian navies offered assistance, Russia refused all help. All 118 sailors and officers aboard Kursk died. The Russian Admiralty initially told the public that the majority of the crew died within minutes of the explosion. But on the 21st of August, Norwegian and Russian divers found 24 bodies in the 9th compartment, the turbine room at the stern of the boat. Captain Lieutenant Dmitry Kolzanov wrote a note listing the names of 23 sailors who were alive in the compartment after the ship sank. Kursk carried a potassium superoxide cartridge of a chemical oxygen generator, used to absorb carbon dioxide and chemically release oxygen during an emergency. However, the cartridge became contaminated with seawater and the resulting chemical reaction caused a flash fire which consumed the available oxygen. The investigation showed that some men temporarily survived the fire by plunging underwater, as fire marks on the bulkheads indicated the water was at waist level at the time. Ultimately, the remaining crew burned to death or suffocated. Russian President Vladimir Putin, though immediately informed of the tragedy, was told by the Navy that they had the situation under control and rescue was imminent. He waited 5 days before he ended his holiday at a presidential resort in Sochi on the Black Sea. Only 4 months into his tenure as president, the public and media were extremely critical of Putin's decision to remain at a seaside resort, and his highly favorable ratings dropped dramatically. The president's response appeared callous and the government's actions looked incompetent. A year later he said, "I probably should have returned to Moscow, but nothing would have changed. I had the same level of communication both in Sochi and in Moscow, but from a PR point of view I could have demonstrated some special eagerness to return." Submarine Recovery, a consortium formed by the Dutch companies Mammoet and Smit International, was awarded a contract by Russia to raise the vessel, excluding the bow. They modified the barge Giant 4, which raised Kursk and recovered the remains of the sailors. During salvage in 2001, the team first cut the bow off the hull using a tungsten carbide-studded cable, as this tool had the potential to cause sparks which could ignite remaining pockets of volatile gases, such as hydrogen. The operation was carefully executed. Most of the bow was abandoned and the balance of the vessel was towed to Severomorsk and placed in a floating dry dock for forensic analysis. The remains of Kursk's reactor compartment was towed to Sida Bay on Russia's northern Kola Peninsula, where more than 50 reactor compartments were afloat at pier points, after a shipyard had defueled the boat in early 2003. The rest of the boat was then dismantled for scrap. Some torpedo and torpedo tube fragments from the bow were recovered and the balance was destroyed by explosives in 2002. Official inquiry results. Notwithstanding the Navy's oft-stated position that collision with a foreign vessel had triggered the event, a report issued by the government attributed the disaster to a torpedo explosion caused when high-test peroxide, a form of highly concentrated hydrogen peroxide, leaked from a faulty weld in the torpedo's casing. The report found that the initial explosion destroyed the torpedo room compartment and killed everyone in the first compartment. The blast entered the second and perhaps the third and fourth compartments through an air conditioning vent. All of the 36 men in the command post located in the second compartment were immediately incapacitated by the blast wave and possibly killed. The first explosion caused a fire that raised the temperature of the compartment to more than 2,700 degrees Celsius. The heat triggered the warheads of between 5 and 7 additional torpedoes to detonate, creating an explosion equivalent to 2 to 3 tons of TNT that was measured 4.2 on the Richter scale on seismographs across Europe and was detected as far away as Alaska. Other explanation. Vice Admiral Valery Ryazantsev differed with the government's official conclusion. He cited inadequate training, poor maintenance, and incomplete inspections that caused the crew to mishandle the weapon. During the examination of the wrecked sub, investigators recovered a partially burned copy of the safety instructions for loading HTP torpedoes, but the instructions were for a significantly different type of torpedo and failed to include essential steps for testing an air valve. The 7th Division, 1st Submarine Flotilla never inspected Kursk's crew's qualifications and readiness to fire HTP torpedoes. Kursk's crew had no prior experience with and hadn't been trained in handling or firing HTP-powered torpedoes. Due to their inexperience and lack of training, compounded by incomplete inspections and oversight, and because the Kursk's crew followed faulty instructions when loading the practice torpedo, Ryazantsev believes they set off a chain of events that led to the explosion. Books. Dunmore, Spencer, Lost Subs, From the Hunley to the Kursk, The Greatest Submarines Ever Lost and Found. Cambridge, Massachusetts. Da Capo. ISBN 0-306-81140-5. Moore, Robert A. Time to Die. The Untold Story of the Kursk Tragedy. Crown Publishers NY, NY. ISBN 9780609610008. Where Gary Ian Boyne, Walter J. Rising Tide, The Untold Story of the Russian Submarines That Fought the Cold War. Basic Books, NY, NY. ISBN 9780465091126. Flynn, Ramsey, Cry from the Deep. The Sinking of the Kursk, the submarine disaster that riveted the world and put the new Russia to the ultimate test. HarperCollins. ISBN 978-060936419. Rear Admiral Mian Zahir Shasi Phoenix, A True Submarine Story. ISBN 9789698318048. Music. The first vocal album of the Russian singer, actress and composer Katerina Kazanyeva, Lullaby for a Man, starts with her rock ballad, Lullaby for a Man, about the crew of the Kursk, Russian band.It wrote a song called Kapitan Kolzanov, or about the Kursk, Barents Sea, song about the incident by Sequoia. Scottish band Mogwai wrote the song Travel is Dangerous, about the tragedy from the viewpoint of the men who perished on board the Kursk. Swedish heavy metal band Wolf wrote a song called K-141 Kursk, detailing the events of the disaster. Canadian musician Lossell wrote a song called Kursk, an ambient music piece on his album Submerse, an album dedicated to different submarines. English musician Matt Elliott wrote the song The Kursk, about the thoughts of a man trapped in the sunken ship. Hungarian metal band Cool Head Clan wrote a song, Torpedo, about the tragedy of Kursk. Australian composer David Chisholm collaborated with Russian poet Angelina Polanskaya on the oratorio Requiem Kursk, for 10 voices and chamber orchestra that premiered at the 2011 Melbourne Festival to 5-star reviews. American post-rock band Explosions in the Sky wrote an instrumental, 6 Days at the Bottom of the Ocean, around the story of the Kursk. Theatre. The Kursk play about the trapped survivors, by Sasha Janovich. Kursk, a play by playwright Brian E. Lavery from the British point of view.